I'm a little bit late in discussing this ship, but better late than never. Today we're going to talk about the brand new Premium Tier 5 Commonwealth Cruiser Perth. You can get this ship as a reward for playing the Halloween event and grinding out the purple looking currency. I can't remember what that currency is called, but you need 10,000 pieces of that purple currency to get this ship. You can grind the majority of it by exhaustively playing the Halloween event, and then the rest of it you will have to purchase crates for, or you'll have to use doubloons in some way to get the rest. So this isn't quite a freemium, it is more or less a cheap Tier 5 premium if grinding out a bunch of currency from a Halloween event doesn't sound like a cost to you in terms of time. Frankly, to me, it does. I don't really have any interest in playing the Halloween event, and I highly doubt that I would be motivated to grind out the necessary amount of that Halloween currency in order to get this ship, because the Perth is, in my opinion, fairly mediocre. And you can kind of see that, the beginnings of that here. The Perth is more or less a Leander, Tier 5 British tech tree cruiser. It's got basically the same hull as the Leander and the same guns. It even has the same consumables, more or less. Like the Leander, the Perth has a smokescreen generator and sonar. But the smokescreen on the Perth is slightly different. It's what's known as a crawling smokescreen, and you can see if you look at the icon for the consumable that the countdown timer on the consumable is still ticking down. It was at 30 seconds, now it's at 20 seconds. The smokescreen generates for, I think, over a minute, and it stays around your ship, meaning that you can go at a quarter speed and the smoke will follow you. Sort of like the slow motion version of the smokes you'd find on the Italian cruisers or the Paolo Emilio. And that is an interesting gimmick for this ship to have, I suppose. I don't know how useful it is to be crawling around at 7 knots in the water, but it's okay. And then it's got the sonar. The only thing it doesn't have that the Leander does is, of course, a heal. And this thing has absolutely no armor. But like the Leander, it also has pretty effective AP. You can see it's citadeling the broadside of a Molotov here, and when I was playing this ship, I saw quite a lot of Molotovs out there, and citadeled quite a lot of them. That's not to say the Molotov is a worse ship than this. In fact, I'd say the Molotov is a far superior Tier 5 premium cruiser to this one. But the AP is decent, and you might have noticed that this is the first time in this battle I've fired the AP. That's because also, unlike the Leander, the Perth comes with high explosive. The high explosive itself doesn't have an especially impressive alpha strike, and I don't really think it has an especially impressive fire chance either. At least not unless you buff it with the requisite commander skills. But the HE does allow it to do perhaps more consistent damage than the Leander can, just due to the fact that it can pretty reliably start fires. And the HE is, of course, effective against destroyers. But as an overall package, this is a cruiser with poor survivability prospects. It's only got 27,100 hit points. Like the British cruisers, which for all intents and purposes, this is a British cruiser. Like them, it has absolutely no armor, so it's vulnerable to being dev-struck by any battleship it might come across. And while the crawling smoke is an interesting thing to have, it doesn't do enough, along with the high explosive on these guns, to make this ship worth pursuing, in my opinion. It's certainly a unique ship, that can't be argued. There's not any other ship really in the game, at least not right now, that has the same kind of smokescreen consumable, so in that sense, it's a novelty, and people may want it just for that reason, but the smokescreen generator is not all that useful, and going at a quarter throttle is more or less the same thing as standing completely still. The only real benefit of it is that you can spend pretty much the entirety of your time inside of the smoke screen, making a turn to get away from the enemy if they're pushing into you. And I suppose that can be useful in some situations, but it's not the be-all, end-all. I should also probably mention that the Perth, like the Leander, comes with torpedoes. I think there are 3 or 4 on either side of the ship. I honestly can't remember the number. And they can be launched in the single line, like British torpedoes, because this is, again, for all intents and purposes, a British cruiser. But the damage output to me feels a little bit lacking, even with the extra tool being available to you in the form of the high explosive and being able to reliably start fires. I haven't really been able to get much of a high damage game in this cruiser. The penetration is not spectacular, of course, because they are light cruiser guns, 152 millimeters, and that means their high explosive can't really penetrate any significant armor values without the use of the equilibrium of power skill, and no British cruiser commander has that skill in their legendary row of skills, so you're stuck with the base penetration, and thus you mostly have to rely on the fire chance if you're shooting at battleships. You can, of course, damage their superstructure. Against cruisers, it's a little better, and of course, against destroyers, it's quite effective. The torpedoes are likewise effective if you get them to land, unlike I did there against the Andrea Doria. Perhaps it would have been a good idea to fire them in single fire. But yeah, it's a mediocre ship. It's a Leander with high explosive and a crawling smoke, but no heal. So I'd say it's probably, for that reason, a little bit less survivable than the Leander. And frankly, I'd honestly rather play the Leander, I think. Keep in mind, though, I don't really consider myself to be an excellent cruiser player. I'd say as far as the 3 surface ship classes in this game goes, I am pretty good with battleships and pretty good with destroyers. Cruisers I'm not necessarily as great with, so my opinion on this ship may be colored by that fact, I suppose. I'd much rather play a destroyer or a battleship than a cruiser in most cases, although there are some cruisers I really do adore in this game, like the Charles Martel, for example. But I think anybody who's played this ship will also get the same sense as I got that something's lacking here. It's not a bad ship by any means, of course. It's probably a pretty good ship if you're a good cruiser player, you're very good at cruiser positioning, and you can use the smoke screens to their fullest effect. In that case, it's probably a fairly decent ship, and I'm sure you can get decent results out of it. But by and large, most of the Tier 5 cruisers, in my opinion at least, are not all that spectacular. Most of the tech trees, anyway. Some of the premiums are pretty nice, and some of the tech trees are okay, like, for example, the Dallas and the Pensacola. Those are quite good Tier 5 tech tree cruisers. And then, you have premiums like the DeGrasse, the Molotov, those kind of things. Tier 5 is just an odd place for cruisers. They have a little bit more firepower than they do at the tiers below Tier 5, and at the same time, they have basically the same survivability, so they are somewhat difficult to play and stay alive throughout the entire course of a game, and as such, I just don't find myself returning to many Tier 5 cruisers. This is not one that I think I'll return to. I think the best I can say is that it does offer a unique experience with its crawling smokescreen, and the fact that it's essentially a British cruiser with HE. If that sounds appealing to you, don't let me rain on your parade. Go ahead and grind those purple coins and spend them on this ship. But I think most people are going to find this to be a mediocre experience, and I suppose that's sort of why I'm showing you a mediocre game here. We've done 66,000 damage. I think we're going to break over 70,000 damage, and we, at least on the bright side, have 248 more hit points than we actually need to stay afloat right now. So things could be worse. We could have been sunk. But of course, our team is going to win this game. There are only 3 ships left alive on the red team, a cruiser, a battleship, and the enemy aircraft carrier. and none of these have a chance to really turn this match around, not when my team has only lost, what, 2 ships, both of which are cruisers, because again, tier 5 cruisers are squishy. In any case, at the end of this battle, we've lit, what, 9 fires and done 71,000 damage. I think that's the total amount of damage we're going to do. Not a very impressive number by anybody's standards, certainly a bit of a mediocre game to reflect what I think is ultimately a mediocre, run-of-the-mill cruiser. So I wouldn't really recommend the Perth. If you don't enjoy playing the Halloween event, like I really don't, and you're worried about missing out on grinding this currency so that you can buy this ship, I don't really think there's any need to let that FOMO take control of you. You're not missing out on much here. Hope you enjoyed the video. If so, give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.